how do we engage the cost of ministry? How do we support ministers and missionaries and pastors, disciple makers who are engaging in the day to day, which has real ramifications for our lives and our marriages and our family? How do we create spaces that can hold that? I think a lot about how the trust that is formed that can hold weight and pain is actually only formed by holding weight and pain. And so, how do we create spaces of practice for this so that when things are really hard, we actually have community that can hold these things? I have a team of 8 guides right now, and we create space for pastors and ministers to meet together, to hold together the challenges that we face in the places of difficulty, the place of wrestling. We've called these a number of things over the years. When they first started a few years ago, we called them triage groups. A lot of that had to do with COVID and the way that my friends and the people that I was working with were just bleeding out. And I think the Barna research over the last few years is pretty alarming about the burnout rate among pastors and ministers and the toll that it takes. And so a few years ago, I started getting pastors together in these triage groups, which then became pastoral care groups. And now we call them slow communities. I mean, we'll get them together to do a couple different things. One is I take there's 2 Bible verses that I hold really deeply in the work that I do. And one is out of Galatians, where Paul encourages the church in Galatia to carry one another's burdens and to so fulfill the law of Christ. And so the question of what does that actually look like to carry one another's burdens, not just delight and celebration and joy and beautiful moments, but what does it actually look like to carry one another's burdens in this way that would fulfill the law of Christ and perhaps even increase our own sustainability in the context of ministry? And the other passage that I've held really deeply is out of James 5:16, which says, "Confess your sins one to another and pray for each other that you may be healed." And I think we believe that confession to God brings forgiveness. Our confession to Jesus brings salvation. But James suggests that actually confessing our places of pain to one another actually engages in a part of healing that God has designed. And so these questions of how do we carry one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, and how do we create context where we can actually engage in practices that bring healing to our lives in the places of pain? And so what we do every month, we take groups of 6 to 8 pastors in some shared ministry spaces. Sometimes there are groups of friends that want to get together and do this together, and sometimes they're just ministers who need a space like this. And we spend 90 minutes once a month, and we slow down together. And we use this acronym SLOW that stands for survey, lament, own, and welcome. So these slow communities, this is what we do. And it isn't linear, so we don't start the group and then we all survey together and we all lament together. We enter into the space and we slow down. We spend a little time in prayer, and then when the groups that I lead, I usually say something along the lines of like, we're sitting around Jesus's table together. What is it that we're noticing that we want to put on the table? And maybe it's things we're surveying. Maybe it's things we're lamenting. Maybe it's a moment of going, ooh, yep, some things in me got exposed about how I'm engaging, and I just need to own that. I need to confess that. And sometimes it's the attentiveness to the welcome of God. And so we take time in these groups to put things on the table, not to fix. And this is really significant to me. These groups, these are not therapy groups. These are not coaching groups. This isn't leadership development. This isn't coming in to say, okay, how do we fix this? How do we make the pain go away? Because the reality for any of us in active discipleship, in any active ministry context, is the things that are heavy are likely not going to go away. We learn how to handle them differently, but people are messy and ministry is messy and it is hard. And the question is actually, how do we walk together through something that is inherently difficult? And so these groups aren't about fixing. Now, growth and healing emerges in these groups, but the intention is to have a space where we can actually be honest and brave together about the experiences we're having in ministry.